Hello everyone, back at it again in my little yellow kayak, and I've got a fun trip for you today. Based on the weather conditions, I already know it's going to be a pretty good trip. I'm just getting rigged up now. But these are the kinds of conditions that you don't want to stay home and miss. And ironically, this is the kind of weather that keeps people home. It's windy as heck. I know maybe it doesn't show up on camera all that well, but it's pretty windy. We got some rain showers coming through. We got plenty of clouds, and I'm the only one out for whatever reason. I mean, these are the conditions that I think are prime time for fishing. These are the conditions that you don't want to sleep in and miss. So I'm gonna start aggressively. I'm gonna start out with a Whopper Plopper. It makes a lot of noise, makes a lot of sound, makes a lot of splash. And I'm clipping on a big swim bait. This is a 6-inch Fish Lab bio wake bait, something like that. Basically what it is, I know they're not allowed to say this, but basically it's a maxed out version of the old Strike King wake shad. They also had a king wake, I think, but the weak part on those baits was a joint. It was like a plastic joint with a metal pin that connected the two parts of the bait. And this one has a much better metal connection system between that single joint in the back. I thought at some point I might have to turn off the video, but the rain held off just long enough so I could get some video. But there could be a few drops on the screen from time to time. So what I'm going to do is, as soon as I figure out a place to put my big swim bait rod, is I'm going to start out with a Whopper Plopper 110 in the loon color. It's basically a black color with some white highlights. And right away the fish were on it. I mean, as soon as I cast that lure out and it touched down, they were on it. And it happened so fast, I didn't really react quickly enough. Or maybe I reacted too fast and I took it away from them. But whatever the case, they were on it as soon as that lure touched the water. So I made another cast, a little to the right, I think. Same thing, they were right on it. And again, I messed it up. But the important part of this is that I already know in the first two casts, these fish are super fired up. And later on in the video, I switch out from that black color because the water's kind of clear, and I went to a more natural bluegill color. But the important part is that the fish are super fired up, and it doesn't have too much to do with me. It's all about the weather. And yeah, if you can identify these kinds of conditions and then throw it like a test bait to see how active the fish are and figure out, okay, they're super fired up. That's huge in fishing. To me, that's huge. Because now that tells me I want an even bigger Whopper Plopper. I wish I had one. I didn't bring it on this trip. I want a bigger Whopper Plopper, or maybe a Chopo, which makes a little bit more noise with the hard plastic tail. And I can fish swim baits. Normally, a lot of times you go fishing and the fish aren't this aggressive. They aren't this active. And you have to, grind it out and work for every bite. And that's not the case on this trip. And that means I can throw big stuff, I can throw bold stuff, and I can really try to get a bigger bite. But right now I'm just throwing around that 110 and catching some bass. Now he's not the biggest fish in the lake, but it's a start. I'll get out my forceps from my fishing bag and he'll be free to go on his way. I always carry 2 pairs of forceps with me, and I keep an extra pair in the truck and a Leatherman super pliers in the truck in case I forget some pliers. Just a little guy to start, but you gotta start somewhere. That rod is old Shimano Intenza baitcaster, and it's a glass rod. actually might be like a lower modulus graphite or some blend or something, but it's really a crankbait rod. And once those fish take the bait, I mean really take the bait, and I can get a hook in them, I lose very few fish because it's so soft it just flexes and the fish don't get enough leverage to throw that bait. And it's a fun bait to fish. They come in and T-bone that Whopper Plopper. You know, it's not like they're slurping it off the surface. They're T-boning it. You can cover a ton of water. On a different day, I'd have a backup rod so I could throw some plastic creature or you know, a Ned bait or a reverse rig or, you know, micro Texas rig or whatever. Because on another day, they can pop that Whopper Plopper and miss the hooks and they won't come back for it. But you throw a backup bait for them and you can get them almost every time. Sometimes I'll even just drop the Whopper Plopper rod, just drop it right on the boat, and then cast the backup bait for them, and I get them like 90% of the time if they miss it. But that's not this kind of trip. So I'm just working around the lake, covering water with the Whopper Plopper, and you can cover so much water with it. And I'm really trying to get that bait away from me. The water right now is kind of clear. Sometimes after a storm, the water will blow out and get all brown and stuff. But this is the early part of a storm system that came through, and the water's still really clear. And the water's shallow too. So I want to get that bait pretty far away from me so I don't spook the fish. And that fish hit on the end of my cast. A little better, but not much. But their activity level was just super high. Popping those hooks off. Yeah, we're getting there. A few casts later, I was fishing the same general area. Seemed like I'd run into wolf packs of active fish. And man, it only took me working that Whopper Plopper for a few cranks. They were on it. I really like the Whopper Plopper in these conditions. It's just so hard to beat. You could fish, you know, a bigger spook like a vixen or something like that with a loud knocker. Sometimes that's good in these conditions too. But I've got wind, I've got clouds, I've got some showers, and the Whopper Plopper just excels for me in those kinds of conditions. Something that gets their attention, calls them out of the weeds, and they T-bone it. Change the hooks on that loon colored one to their ST35s, owner ST35s, and they're actually crankbait hooks, but they work pretty well for the Whopper Plopper. They're thinner wire, but they seem plenty strong. They've got a slick gray coating on them, they penetrate well, and they have tipped in points. That also could be why I missed the first two fish. They're really good at holding fish, but sometimes if the fish are hitting them really aggressively, they kind of bounce off of them because the tips are tipped in, the tips of the hook points are tipped in. Later on I switched to a different color, bluegill color, and that has owner ST36, which are just typical round bend trebles, and those are better at hooking fish that are just slapping out of bait. The ST35s are better at holding a fish once they commit to eating it. Now I was catching a bunch of fish on that black 110 Whopper Plopper, but I thought since I missed the first two fish and the water was so clear, I would go to a more natural bluegill color. It's really not the greatest bluegill color, but it is more natural, I think. And I wanted to see if I could get a few more fish on that color. And it ended up working out, but I bet, you know, you could have caught them on a lot of different colors on this particular day. And it really just had more to do with the weather. The other thing that happened is that it stopped kind of misting on me, and I put my the hood of my rain suit down, and I thought that was another reason to switch from black, which I really like black early in the morning late in the evening, and when it's raining. It's good a lot of times, but those are my favorite times to fish it. It was when the skies are kind of dark and the skies are lightening just a little bit. And it doesn't take me too long before I start catching fish on that bluegill color. I let this one soak for just a few seconds before I started my retrieve. Sometimes that's a good trick. It lets the fish close the gap. If they're aggressive, they hear that splashdown, they come over to see what's going on, and then as soon as that Whopper Plopper starts moving, they're on it, and then they T-bone it. You can mimic the same kind of a thing, although I think the splashdown is best. But sometimes a stop and go retrieve, if they're just following it, if you stop it, let it soak for a few seconds, and then start up your retrieve again, sometimes that'll trigger them to go. Bass seem to like that more than pickerel too. Pickerel like generally faster retrieves, so if you're in a pond like this one that has a mix of bass and pickerel, sometimes you can get more bass just by changing up your retrieve and throwing in a few pauses. This was 1 or 2 casts later. I left this clip in the video just because I thought it was kind of interesting. But slow and steady retrieve, I'm getting that plopping sound. You can feel it and hear it and see it when it's the right speed. It's that rhythmic plop, 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 plop. Anyway, the fish seemed to like it. And I did have a fish on for a while. But he took me into the weeds, and then somehow I got wrapped up on somebody's old fishing line, and the fish was able to get off. Now when you find an old fishing line in ponds, a lot of times that's a sign of heavy fishing pressure. You wouldn't know it today because nobody's out fishing except me because of the weather. But that's another reason why I like fishing in these kinds of conditions, is because generally I have the lake or the pond or whatever all to myself. And if it's really stormy, like almost hurricane conditions, I'm better off fishing a lake that I can wade around, and I'll fish it in my waders. I'll leave the kayak at home. Sometimes it can just, the water can be all white caps and it can be kind of dangerous. But the fish, their activity levels will still be, through the roof high pre-hurricane, before it really gets crazy. I mean, if there's like telephone poles tipping over and trees falling over, that's not the time to go fishing. That's the time to hunker down. But if it's at all fishable, the fish will be, charged up generally pre-storm or before the main body of the storm hits. This line just went on forever and ever. It took me a while to get all the weeds off of it. It seemed like it'd been there for a while, into the muck and everything. And it takes fishing line a really long time to degrade. So if it's at all possible, I try to, find all of it and take it with me so it isn't polluting the pond. Plus, I won't lose fish getting hung up in underwater line either. Alright, I got the line situation squared away. Nice long cast. That combo is not a high-end combo at all. I already mentioned the rod. That's an old Intensa cranking rod. But the reel is a Daiwa Fuego CT. And it's great. It's not the smoothest reel, but I just keep it well lubricated, well oiled, keep those bearings well oiled. And it's smooth enough. It works fine. And it's great. You don't need to spend a ton of money on certain aspects of bass fishing. When it comes to like sensitivity and feel, that's the kind of thing that I feel like that it's worth it to invest more money. If you have the funds, definitely spend them. Get the best quality gear you can. But in certain areas like this, I don't need top tier gear to fish like this. And it might actually hurt me. I mean, I mean, I know this is a cranking stick, but in general, lower price point rods will be more moderate fast action, and higher ends will have crisper actions, lighter blanks, all that stuff. And I feel like sometimes you can pull baits away from fish, and a moderate action or a moderate fast action lets them take the bait just a second more. And sometimes that extra second can make all the difference between hooking fish and keeping them pinned and getting them in the boat versus losing them uh, when they hit, or losing them during the fight, or losing them next to the boat. And so, yeah, you don't have to spend a ton of money to fish this way. Especially, if you want to fish with two rods, you have a Whopper Plopper to find fish, and then like a backup rod to actually pick them apart and catch them, or if they miss a bait. Alright, I've had enough of the Whopper Plopper. I'm switching it up. I'm going with a 6-inch Fish Lab Bio Wake swim bait. And for a swim bait, it's very reasonably priced. I think it's $16, something like that, $17. And I got it in a herring pattern. My first cast, I almost had a fish. Somehow he spit the hooks. But that's a good start. I already had an idea the fish were pretty active from the Whopper Plopper, and the way they responded to that swim bait just gives me a ton of confidence to keep throwing it, even though the first fish didn't end up in the boat on this particular trip. I'm going to lock that swim bait rod in my hand now, because these are the conditions where I feel like if you're going to spend time casting a big swim bait, this is the time to do it. This is the place, this is the time. Maybe you get a big fish. It took me a few casts to actually connect with a fish. I had a few kind of slap at it. Even in the wind, it casts pretty well. I mean, it's a big bait. I've got it on a SLX swim bait rod. It's 7/8 heavy, I believe. I'll list it all in the video description, just like all my other videos. And the reel is a Daiwa Tatula 200 with 65-pound X9 braid on it, and a 25-pound Maxima Ultra Green Mono leader. And I got my first fish. I almost got him in the boat as soon as I locked those lip grippers on him. And maybe the size went up just a little bit from the Whopper Plopper. It's not a giant fish. It's really not all that much bigger than the swim bait. He's probably, I don't know, a third the size of the swim bait. He might go 18 inches, maybe. So, yeah, throwing a big swim bait doesn't mean you're going to just catch giant fish. It catches all kinds of fish, especially if they're fired up with the weather. But I feel like I have better odds of connecting with a bigger fish, 5, 6, 7 pounds, throwing big baits like this in conditions like these. So I threw the swim baits around for a while, and I switched to a custom bait made by a friend's son, perch color. That thing was a beast to throw. I tried a Spro Rat for a while, and I couldn't really do anything with them. I had high hopes that they would be all over the swim bait. But yeah, I don't know, maybe it got a little bit too late in the morning. So I switched back to the Whopper Plopper to make sure I still had a bite and the fish were still aggressive. And yeah, they're still aggressive. They T-boned it. Not giant fish. And maybe the big swim baits were a little bit too big for these fish. I mean, these aren't giant fish. A lot of them were in the 2-pound range. Couple 3s in there. I don't think I broke 4. But they were super fired up because of the weather. I like those natural patterns like bluegill in clear water, like we have here. Yeah, another nice one. A few casts later and I'm on again. This was a great morning of fishing. I wish they were all like this. But sadly that's not always the case. Anytime I can catch them on topwater or a frog, swim baits, I'm a pretty happy guy. So if you made it this far, thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it. Just like all my other videos, I'll list all the gear in the video description so you can duplicate what I was doing here today at your own home lake and hopefully have some good success there too. I'll catch you on the next one. See ya!